So, in this last module, we were talking about activating effects, and we're going to continue on with them. And this time, we're going to focus a little bit more on some more female hormones. I focused on testosterone last time. So, in females, they have a menstrual cycle, and the hypothalamus and pituitary interact with the ovaries to produce the menstrual cycle. This is like a cyclical 28-day thing. Periodic variation in hormones and fertility over the course of 28 days. Ovulation is usually around day 14. The textbook calls it the peri-ovulatory period. We're going to see some graphs about it that were taken from the textbook. And when we talk about day 14, what we're talking about is day 1 would be the first day of her menstrual cycle. And right around day 14, probably between days 10 and 17, that kind of area would be the peri-ovulatory cycle. It's definitely not an exact date on day 14. It's just usually around there. There's another interesting but weird, slightly gross, maybe for some of you, fact about ovulation. So your mucus is different at different times of the month. So sometimes it's like a very milky, kind of creamy consistency, and other times it's like rubbery, kind of like a sticky hand. Haha. Like, it's rubbery. And then there's other times when it's actually clear and slippery. Now, this should not be confused when she's getting sexually aroused, because when she's sexually aroused, that's actually vagina sweat. That's what vaginal lubrication is it's fluid that's released from the vaginal walls from it kind of sweating. How fun, huh? But anyway, the clear and slippery, these would be mucus that she would find in her excretions from her vagina when she's not sexually stimulated. Like she might find it in her underwear when she wipes, when she's urinating. And what the clear and slippery is actually the uterus releases this mucus called mucin. And these are like string like channels. So I don't know, Star Trek is probably before you guys' time, but they used to have Star Trek, and it was like, beam me up, Scotty, and you would beam them up through you would lift people through these kind of waves or tube kind of things. And I picture the mucin like that. Is what they do is they act as channels from the uterus to allow the sperm to swim through to bypass the acidity of the vagina. So remember when we talked about sperm characteristics, that the vagina is very acidic. And so these channels of mucin actually help to get the sperm up there to the uterus. So anyway, interesting things when a woman is ovulating, the times of the month, and then also checking your mucus each day. So let's go on to our next one. So the textbook goes into all the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone and this and that. And it's really interesting stuff, but I feel like we have so many things to learn that I'm not going to focus too much on this. Here's the analysis of what's going on here, and I'd rather just focus on other things here. So the days of the cycle when fertility is the highest is the middle of the menstrual cycle. So actually the days closer to her menstrual period itself, and the days like right after her menstrual period are when you're least likely to ovulate. So here's an interesting thing. Studies suggest that women become more sexually responsive during this time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple videos, which I think are pretty interesting. One is we're going to show how your face changes during ovulation. But not only does your face change during ovulation, and men tend to find women whose faces are during their ovulatory stage more attractive, but it seems that women's behavior changes during ovulation. So here's some things that I took from the textbook. They show increased attention to sexually related stimuli such as erotic videos. They show increased interest in flirting. Your textbook also talks about how you're more likely to prick red. I've seen other studies where you tend to wear more sexually suggestive clothes. And then what we're going to see is we're going to see another video. So we're going to see the ovulation face change video, and then we're going to see a little video where they talk about this study where they've studied strippers and lap dancers, and they found that strippers tend to make more money when they're ovulating, and also lap dancers, they found that in a similar study. So let's take a look at that now.
That your face can actually change shape over the course of your monthly cycle. And so, I guess I'd better see if it happens to me. I'm about to do my ovulation test. A tad confronting. Be back in a minute. Gotta wait exactly 5 minutes. Each day for a month, I have to test what part of my cycle I'm in. Shit, I think it's positive. God, you just feel like a mammal. Oh well, better go get my photo taken. I've recruited my young colleague Roz into this as well, reckoning I might be too old for the full shape-shifting effect. Gorgeous. Now, we have to get our photos taken in exactly the same spot at pretty much the same time of day. And meanwhile, we keep tracking our cycles. Negative. It's negative. Finally, we pick our best matched 2 photos, one at our most fertile during ovulation and one 2 weeks later in what's called the luteal phase. And we take them to the blokes. Gut instinct, which do you think is the most attractive?
That one. For that one? That one?
Why did you pick the one on the right here?
Sort of the chin,
Yeah?
I think. Yeah, I think that's a squarer chin.
Ah, that's what we're after. This is a composite photo of 20 women from the published study we're copying. Not only did the men find the ovulation face more attractive, compared to the luteal face, the jaw is narrower, the nose less broad, and the eyebrows less pronounced. And the person who found this is our old friend, Dr. Oberzalker.
We think that what is responsible for this is women have higher levels of estrogen when ovulating, and this estrogen actually binds water. And so what we are actually doing when we're ovulating, we're pulling all the soft tissue up because this is all more stuffed, nothing is hanging. And that's why the whole appearance becomes more feminine.
So amazingly, it seems these gorgeous women get even closer to the female ideal when they're ovulating.
In her cycle can have a dramatic impact on the tips that she gets. And so they give the examples. This is research done at the University of New Mexico. They found that women strippers who were ovulating made on average $70 per hour in tips, which, by the way, that's a crazy amount of money. I gotta get into the stripping game. Those who were menstruating made $35, and those who were between the two made $50. And so we're talking about doubling between menstruating and ovulating, $35 to $70. And so to any strippers watching this, you should be aware of that. What do you think?
I think it makes sense. Maybe you can plan your schedule around that and make sure you're working those days if you're a stripper. But it doesn't surprise me too much, given that pheromones can affect our behavior, and our hormones do attract the opposite sex depending on where we are in our cycle and our genetic component. So
yeah, and the reason that they think might be causing this is that guys are picking up on exactly those sorts of I guess pheromones and stuff like that, and they might be more predisposed to give a woman money if they think they can have a child with her, I guess, which seems weird, like, because you think you go to the strip club just to see some boobs or something.
But I think
no, apparently they're thinking about childbearing.
I think it goes back to the very primal instincts, right, of having sex and procreating.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and handing over money, very primal. Okay, number.
Well, another response to that video, they were talking about the pheromones, is maybe the strippers were better at flirting, making the men feel better, increasing their dopamine, which allowed them to tip them more. Because what this research is all saying is not so much pheromones, but that women dress sexier, we act sexier, so that we flirt more. The lap dancers touched the men more. So maybe there's an alternate explanation there. But let's go on to something else. Let's talk about how these birth control pills are working. So they prevent pregnancy by interfering with the usual feedback cycle between the ovaries and the pituitary. And remember, I told you we're not going to focus on all this surge of FSH and luteinizing hormone that would be releasing this, but I just want to let you guys know how that works. Is it thickens the mucus of the cervix. So the cervix is the bottom of the uterus, and there's this little tiny channel that the sperm swims up. It's about the size of your pinky nail. It's called the OS or the os. And so it's going to close that off. So it's more difficult for the sperm to reach the egg, and it prevents the egg also from implanting in the uterus if it were to be fertilized. So I like this because I wanted to talk to you about something that I get asked about in class a lot. As you can see, we're looking at autosexual activities masturbation, basically female initiated to her heterosexual activities. So they found women not using birth control methods initiated sex much more during the peri-ovulatory period right here. See, remember I told you about 14 days menstruation, 15 here. This is the peri estimated time of ovulation. Um, so then you could see how birth control, it seemed to, taking birth control seemed to inhibit this because birth control is kind of mimicking pregnancy. So isn't it funny how birth control not only did all those things on the last slide about stopping the sperm getting up there and stuff, but it seems to decrease your initiation of sex during that time period. Using intrusive methods that would be kind of like the IUD and things like that. It doesn't have that same effect. So this is a hormonal effect right here. Now, the thing that I wanted to bring up, and I don't quite have an answer for this, but I have a guess, is a lot of women ask me, they say, why is it that you really seem to want to have sex right before your period? And that's what this is showing as well. Look, it's almost as high in women not using birth control is here. And so something that I want to bring back is in a lot of books that I use, my sexuality books, they talk about testosterone being the hormone of the sex drive for both males and females. And your textbook is also taking that stance, but they're saying it's more complicated because estriadol, and they do a lot of research in there about how estriadol is affecting it. But I think right here, your testosterone is getting unmasked right before your period because that's what's dropping you down is the lower levels of estrogen and progesterone right here. And so again, I want to go back to when we talked about testosterone for men in the previous module. I think a lot of those statements would still go well for women, even though women's sex drive does seem to be more complicated because of the mixture of hormones. But I think that exercise definitely would increase a woman's sex drive. They've even found that many women have had exercise induced orgasms. They've done lots of studies on how when a woman is exercising and she watches an erotic video that she seems to respond more. So exercise can have a major boost. They've also talked in the textbook how women with higher levels of testosterone are more likely to initiate sex. So testosterone is definitely a big role in the sex drive for both males and females. Okay, now we're on to another hormone, and this is one that I'm really happy to talk to you about, and the textbook doesn't talk about a couple things that I want to bring up. So here we're talking about prolactin. And so prolactin is necessary for milk production. So a really interesting thing that some of you may not know is that men can actually breastfeed if the hormone levels are right. This enables a mother to eat more than usual. I think I've told you guys in previous videos that I have 5 boys, and I did breastfeed all of them for long periods of time because that's what we do in our family. And boy, I just loved how much I could eat. I could eat like a horse and still be very skinny. This seems to be responsible for maternal behavior. And I put this link up here if you wanted to look at it, that men can lactate if their hormone levels are high enough. And in fact, there's been some cases of transgendered people when they're trying to get their hormones right. Maybe they've gotten their hormones from a place that wasn't regulated as well as the United States, that some of them have developed breast milk. Um, there's cases that if you want to read in the article where like men have actually breastfed the babies, but it's usually not going to happen uh, unless some kind of tumor occurs or some strange and unusual situation occurs. But this is the one that I wanted to bring up right here because I wish someone had told me this, and so I want to share it with you. So the textbook doesn't go into this, but there's research that shows that prolactin seems to inhibit the sex drive. And I wanted to share that with you because it was something that wasn't shared with me, and I did experience it. Is when you're breastfeeding, it may be nature's natural method of kind of keeping you not pregnant the next for until you finish breastfeeding that baby, because you can have a baby when you're still breastfeeding, but it would be really hard on your system to breastfeed this child and also nourish the other child. So it would be better if a woman finishes breastfeeding before she gets pregnant again. So there's been a lot of research that has found that prolactin seems to inhibit the sex drive. So, ladies, I wanted to share that with you because they found that one of the most stressful events that a couple will endure is the birth of their first child. And so, a lot of us think that having a baby is going to bring us closer together, but a new baby creates a lot of stress. You don't get sleep at night. You've got all these hormonal changes that we've been talking about throughout this. And then all of a sudden, maybe this is the time when the couple needs to be the closest, that she all of a sudden doesn't feel interested in sex. And so he may feel pushed away, like, oh, she just wants attention to the son. And so this is something that I want you to be aware of is it could inhibit your sex drive, but knowing that maybe this is just hormonal or I'm under a lot of stress and realizing the importance that the sex may be for to bond the couple together is something that I think that everyone should be taught about, to understand that this could be hormonal. It's not that I've lost interest in my partner. Here's another super interesting fact right here is fathers with the lowest testosterone and the highest, I'm sorry, this should say highest prolactin levels. Oh, I'll try to put something in there, like a word right there to make sure that we have highest prolactin levels, spent the most time playing and caring for the child. So, not only does prolactin affect women's behavior, but prolactin also affects men's behavior. Okay, this is our final hormone that we're going to be talking about in this particular activating segment, activating effects segment, is we're talking about vasopressin. And so they have these cute little pictures here with the mice. And so vasopressin, it's a hormone synthesized by the hypothalamus. It's secreted by the posterior pituitary gland. It's associated with social behavior in many species. Some textbooks that I've taught out of, they call it the monogamy molecule. And we've talked about the voles, and we have this hypothalamus picture here. Is here the hypothalamus is very receptive to this vasopressin, which is your antidiuretic hormone. Remember that? So that it works with regard to thirst in the brain, but it also seems to have a role in our social behaviors. So these right here tend to be pair bonded. They tend to be monogamous. They tend to mate with just one mate for their whole life. Whereas here you don't see as many receptors for the vasopressin. And this strain of vole right here is they are more likely to not be monogamous. They're just be very polygamous. They'll mate with many different mates. And here they're showing a female mouse with high levels of vasopressin. She's very caring for the babies, but here the mouse does not have high levels of vasopressin, and as you can see, she's not caring for the babies. So they think that maybe vasopressin may have a role and how monogamous we are. So I've looked at the research on this, and actually what they're putting it to is they're relating it to thirst. Is they're talking about how vasopressin seems to stabilize us. And so people with higher levels of vasopressin are less impulsive. And they've even related it to sweating. And I don't know how you guys feel about this. I've asked my classes, and they seem to have different thoughts on it. Is I've seen some studies take this as far as looking at sweating and finding that people with higher levels of vasopressin do not sweat as much. And so they're looked at the monogamy rates of them, and there's found some research has found that the more someone sweats, maybe the higher they more likely they are to be more have an interest in more mates. That's just something for you to think about there. So that's vasopressin. You know what? As I'm going over this, I can see that's my last slide, but I feel like I need to add one more um, chemical effect on sexuality that was not discussed here. And I want to talk about serotonin. So something about serotonin, they did have a little blurb about it with regard to testosterone. Is serotonin seems to inhibit the testosterone effects. So the reason why I want to talk about serotonin is because of SSRIs. So, serotonin has an interesting relationship to sexuality. Is they found that people with very low levels of serotonin seem to be more random in their choices of partners. So, as we're talking about monogamy molecule and the vasopressin, that's what sparked this whole thing of, oh, yeah, we need to talk about serotonin. So here's like an analogy. I'm sure you hear people say, oh, they just people who sleep around, they have low self-esteem. They don't think much about themselves. And I hear that for both men and women, like just random sleeping around, people will say that about them, like, oh, they have low self-esteem. They don't have much confidence in themselves. That's why they're sleeping around or something like that. And actually, there is a correlational evidence with the serotonin, as they found lower levels of serotonin seem to predict more random sexual activity. Actually, they find that many times when paraphilic behaviors occur, there is a drop in serotonin. But now let's contrast that with super high levels of serotonin. Like if you take an SSRI, which is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which is raising your serotonin levels to very high. What happens with those, a major side effect of those, is that you kind of lose some interest in sex. So it seems like there needs to be a real balance in your serotonin levels to have the right sexual behavior. Um, so I think that that's an important thing that I'd like you to be aware of is knowing that if your partner takes an antidepressant medication or something that raises their levels of serotonin, they may not be as interested in sex. Also, understanding that lower levels of serotonin may make us feel more random in choosing a mate. Maybe when somebody gets really down and out and depressed, they may just be seeking out a mate without really thinking it through of, is this the best partner for me?